Hello, and welcome to the video series on building and defending your budget from the Finance Library. This is the second in a series of 3 videos. The other videos can be found at our website, finance-library.com, or on our YouTube channel at finance-library. So there are 2 topics that we are covering in this video. The first is how to structure your budget request so that the odds of approval improve. And the second is a topic that I've heard over and over again, how to embed the value proposition associated with soft investments in budget proposals in a way that is appealing to the finance organization. So we're going to start with the structure. So if you think about how this all plays out, when the finance organization receives your budget request, what they're going to do is scan the submission, like we said in the first video, to look for answers to the questions that they need to answer and defend. Okay? So you might remember that in the first video, we talked about the fact that the finance organization will rank order the various proposals on the basis of their cost-benefit profile and pick the ones that are most appealing. So it is in our interest then to structure a budget proposal in a way that dovetails nicely with the way the finance organization reviews these proposals. And so that's what we're going to discuss now. In my experience, there are 5 questions that are typically on the radar of the CFO's office when they review a submission from you. The first is the business problem itself. I think it's an important question to discuss, and what you're discussing here is what problem does this investment solve, right? So there's the identification of the problem, and closely related to that, it is also important to delineate how this particular problem is a priority and how it fits in with the company's strategic priorities at that point in time. Because one investment could be a very attractive investment in an environment of growth and expansion, but the same investment may not be as appealing if the company is facing challenging circumstances and are looking to cut costs. And so outlining not only the problem, but also the context of the problem, given the priorities of the business, is important. The second piece of information that the finance organization looks for is the cost of the investment. Now, more than anybody else, the CFO's organization knows that the costs are often well beyond the initial commitment that's being made, right? So for instance, if you're buying a piece of software, there may be an upfront investment and then an annual subscription fee. Or there might be certain payments that are spread over a period of time. And if you present only the initial payment, that raises suspicion within the CFO's office. So it's important that the whole picture is presented. Both the initial upfront costs as well as operating costs and a picture of when and how these payments get made is important information for the finance department. So it's important to present it clearly and completely. That brings us to the third item on the list, or in the proposal, which is the expected return. As you can imagine, this is a decision-making variable. It tells the finance organization what is the payoff from making the investment, allows them to rank this proposal in their list of various projects as it relates to the cost-benefit profile. So that you have to answer questions of how much of the investment will it return, when it will return, and so on. So these three are the more obvious things that you would list in a submission. But there are a couple of other things which are important as well and often missed. The other two are one is the risk of inaction, which is that, yes, this is a proposal to do something, but the, if that action is not taken, there is also a cost, a cost that is incurred by the firm. Again, that may not be visible. So the finance organization may not realize that the lack of action may also create a cost. So you have an opportunity to highlight that the risk and the cost of inaction, which then presents your proposal perhaps in a more favorable light. And from a CFO's organization standpoint, they may ask questions about, hey, what happens if we don't do it? What happens if we delay? What happens if it, is it truly a priority, right? So anticipating those questions and kind of explaining why the cost and the risk of inaction is very real is a way to preempt some of these the thought process happening at the in the finance department. And finally, it is helpful to present the alternatives that you have considered. You can be sure that the CFO's organization or CFO's office is going to ask questions about, hey, did you consider alternate options? Are there less risky or less expensive options that you could consider, even if the payoffs from that are not great as the payoff that you list? So what are those options and why, when have you considered them? So again, to preempt those kinds of questions, it is helpful to be able to list them and build credibility by pointing out that you did consider some of the alternatives that were potentially available to you. Okay, so taking a closer look. So what does it mean to list the business problem, right? Often we talk about the solution. So we are going to do this, and this is the benefit of it. But often we don't pay as much attention to the business problem itself. So for instance, you might say, and again, it's helpful to quantify it here. So you might say something like, our incident response time is 40% above industry benchmark. And the consequence of that is that it's costing us roughly 120 engineering hours more per month than the typical firm within our competition in the market. So the request then is to say, this is the business problem we are trying to solve. So we might need better software or better tooling that allows us to lower our incident response time and get closer to our industry benchmark or beat it. Okay. Now, once you have identified the business problem, like I mentioned before, it is important to fully document the costs of the investment needed to solve this problem. Right? Often, so for instance, if we were dealing with a situation where we are making the case for hiring of an employee. If we were just to say that the cost of hiring an employee is the incremental salary, the finance department knows that that is not quite complete, because in hiring a new employee, that you not only have to look at the direct cost of the salary, you have to look at benefits, you have to look at payroll taxes, you have to look at overheads, or the fully loaded cost of bringing an employee on board. So if you just were to list the salary, you're undercounting the cost of that investment, right? And equally, it is important to show both upfront costs as well as ongoing costs, so that the picture is complete. Both, yes, it might look like the numbers are going up, and the investment numbers are going up as a result of your request, but it positions you better, and positions you more credibly if you were to list the full cost basis of that investment. Um, of course, the expected return from the investment is a very important piece of information that's highly considered by the finance organization. But the fact is that not all of you are experts on doing detailed analysis of the expected return, computing ROI, computing NPV. So what you could do is present one, maybe two. If you can only present one, present the payback period. Look for how long it would take for you to recover your investment. It's an intuitive kind of threshold. Everybody understands it, and it's easier for you to present and easier to talk through with your counterparts from the finance org. And here to just make sure that every assumption you make um, uh, in coming up with the ROI is well documented. And the good thing is that even if they disagree with your assumptions, you still have a way to engage in a conversation. And all that is likely to happen is that you have to change the numbers a little bit, but the finance team would find it helpful that you performed the initial analysis to get them most of the way there. So now to use the example that we just had, which is that of this incidence response time, to show how the calculation might go, I have an example here. So let's assume that you have 120 hours of above and beyond what the average incidence response time is being incurred by your company. And if at an average uh, hourly rate of $150 per hour, this additional 120 hours costs the company $18,000 a month. Now, let's suppose that a new tool or a new piece of software can help reduce that excess cost by 20%. Given that the monthly cost today is an additional 18,000, 20% of that would be $3,600 per month, which when converted to an annual basis is $43,200 per year. So what this is saying is that your initial investment of $25,000 is yielding $43,200 a year. And so another way to think about it is that if the $43,200 was spread over the year, it would take 3/5. That is 25,000 divided by 43,200 is 3/5. So 3/5 of the year to recover your investment, which means 3/5 of 12 months is roughly 7 months. So it takes about 7 months to recover the $25,000, and it's in the remaining 5 months that the remaining 18,000 odd dollars, $18,200 of additional benefit is realized. So the payback period then is that out of the 43,200 realized over the year, in just 7 months, the original $25,000 is recovered. So the payback period is 7 months. So this is a way for you to illustrate how your investment led to an attractive outcome where you recovered more than what you invested, and you recovered all of your original investment in 7 months, creating very little risk for the firm to make that investment. Notice I chose an investment here which was led to only a 20% reduction. You could potentially make a much bigger investment that wipes out all of the 120 hours that in incident response time, excess hours in incident response time, or even lowers it beyond the industry standard. So if you were to do that, then the argument is different. The benefits are higher, but the costs are also higher, but the calculation would follow a similar logic. Okay? Hopefully that gives you a sense of how the analysis gets performed. The reality is that you may or may not be comfortable with performing this analysis yourself. And so one of the things you could do is that, given that these kinds of analysis are readily doable now in the AI tools like ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude, you could easily plug in this information and ask the tool to perform the payback analysis and an ROI analysis or NPV analysis. And if you're not comfortable with that, because the AI tools are often prone to hallucination, I have created certain tools that you can access to do these calculations. And those are available on the website as well. And hopefully, between those two options, you are able to do some of these analyses, in a manner that's similar to what I just shared with you. Now that leaves us with the remaining two items in the five-part structure, namely the risk of inaction and the alternatives considered. In my experience, the risk of inaction is probably the most powerful argument you can make, especially if you are a non-revenue generating group within the organization. Right? And so clearly the most underused element that I have seen. By making the cost of inaction explicit in your submission, you are calling out the fact that, hey, this is not a nice to have, but this is something that if you don't do, you're going to incur real costs. And that often allows you to get the attention of the finance team in a way that a simple proposal may not. So I strongly recommend that you list, for instance, the cost of regulatory exposure from not taking the actions you recommend, or the increased employee turnover that comes as a result of the inaction, and so on. Now, with respect to the alternatives considered, like I said before, the finance team often looks at it and says, hey, how about we spend less? How about we spend it differently? How about we spend 50% less and get 40% of the benefit, and so on, right? So there, you want to be able to think about it ahead of time, and you could, for instance, in an example, say something like, hey, we did consider an outsource model. Yes, it does yield about a 15% benefit upfront. But when we examined it more closely, we realized that there is a certain loss of institutional knowledge, which creates knowledge retention risk. And this knowledge retention risk far outweighs the 15% savings that we get from outsourcing, right? Again, the finance team may or may not agree with you or may not agree with you fully, but you have already now marked a line in the sand that allows you to be better positioned for a negotiation. Okay. So with that, we are going to, so again, as a practical matter, I would strongly recommend that you present the proposal in a one-page format. You could attach various supporting documents too, but I find it powerful if you can summarize your proposal into a one-page format with into one page with a format roughly along the lines of what I'm going to walk you through. Okay? In that format, you could, I would suggest that you have a header which clearly and upfront states the amount of investment that you're seeking. So that's very visible right up front. And soon after that, you provide a counter to that number by presenting the payoff from that investment, namely in terms of the ROI, the payback period, NPV, and so on, right after you present the total dollar amount of investment that you're seeking. So immediately somebody who's looking at it can see that, hey, you're asking for a certain investment, maybe a large number, but immediately the payoff looks appealing enough for them to dig deeper. Now, once you have set that up, you want to go through the 5 sections we have discussed before. 5 sections being the business problem, the full investment cost, the expected return, the risk of inaction, and the alternatives considered. So you can sequence them roughly, I would say 3 to 5 sentences per section. And so with that, you would have a fairly comprehensive document in one page. Of course, you have spent more than one page worth of effort to get to that one page. So you should feel comfortable either attaching all the supporting material, or making a note saying that all the supporting material for this analysis is available on request. So, I see a lot of value in having a one-page summary, if you will, to that analysis to make life easier for, in the sense of how you build your case. It's a powerful, could be a powerful one-page narrative, and also makes it easier for the recipient to review. We are now going to turn our attention to the second topic in this video, which is soft investments. The term soft investments may make you think that the investment itself is not very valuable, but really it's like the difference between tangible versus intangible investments, right? Intangible payoffs. What the soft investments refer to are investments where the payoff is often very intangible. It could be in reduced turnover, lower risk, um, uh, you know, uh, the company's brand, which then creates better perceptions in the market, and so on. Those are high value investments, especially in a world where most of the company's value is in the form of intangibles. Um, Having said that, the reality is that it doesn't always nicely translate to a line item in the P&L. It's not always visible. So that makes it harder for you to make the case. So as it is, you have a difficulty translating that into numbers, and that and especially in a world where the finance team is primarily focused on numbers, you get often put in a position where a otherwise great idea gets rejected just because it's lost in translation. So the question is, what can we do about it? What can we do to present a stronger argument? What can we do to improve the likelihood that a proposal in the form of a software investment is still treated with the seriousness that it deserves, and you are able to present it in a way that has some strong likelihood of acceptance. And the way you do that is to build what's called the monetization bridge. What it is that, so every time you make an investment, there is a benefit, right? So in the case of tangible or revenue generating or direct cost cutting kind of benefits, you are able to measure that easily. In the case of soft investments, you are able to see the outcome clearly. So for instance, you may have fewer incidents occurring. You may have faster ramp up periods for new hires, right? You may have higher engagement. You may have all kinds of benefits, but again, those benefits are intangible in nature. So what you have to do then is to take those intangible benefits and use a dollar proxy to quantify these intangible benefits. I have listed a bunch of these kind of examples on the page, and I'll talk through a couple of them so you get a better sense of what I mean here. So let's assume, for instance, you have a case to make an investment for some training, which then is expected to reduce attrition. That is a commendable goal by itself because attrition is expensive. So, and from a culture standpoint, it is helpful to have people wanting to stay with the firm. And if the training helps, it seems like it's a good argument to make for an investment in a training program. Now, how do you quantify this, right? So you might quantify this by saying that, because of the training program, you are reducing attrition, let's say, by 2 employees every year, compared to, let's say, an average attrition rate of 4 employees every year. So what you have done here is you have saved the cost associated with the attrition of 2 employees. So you now know that this avoided cost of attrition can be thought of as the replacement cost to find employees who can then replace those 2 employees. Now, the replacement cost is the proxy for that was the roughly 1 to 2 times annual salary. Why is it 1 to 2 times annual salary? Because it's not just about the salary itself, but it is the cost of identifying employees, bringing them on board, and the learning curve that they have to go through to be able to deliver at the level the departing employee delivered at. Right? So there are some significant costs of replacing an employee. So every time you avoid an employee cost, you are avoiding those replacement costs. So that could be one way to measure how this training program led to lower attrition, which can be measured in now dollar terms. You can do that for, let's say, another example. Let's say it's an investment in employer brand. Typically, when a company builds up its brand, it's perceived better in the marketplace, attracts more interested employees. And so, which means that the time and the cost of searching for a new employees is lower, which means that the cost per hire is lower. And so you could measure the cost per hire. You look at the standard average cost per hire times the number of hires, but then you allow for a reduction in that based on the efficiency that is gained from an improved employer brand. So that's another way, for example, in which you might try to convert a intangible outcome, which is better recruiting efficiency, into dollar terms, which then makes a proposal a stronger proposal when, even though it's a soft dollar investment, it's now been converted to a dollar narrative, which makes it more appealing to the finance team. Just to clarify again how this calculation works through, let's assume that in this training example, the training costs $60,000 and that 60,000 avoids two departures, and the two departures would have cost the company $450K. Okay? Assuming that the cost of attrition is roughly 1.5 times the annual salary. So now you've got, your hope is that the 60K in investment will reduce the annual attrition cost, but you're realistic. You don't think it'll reduce a small 60K investment in training is going to completely wipe it out. But let's assume you believe that it is going to reduce your annual attrition cost by 20%. So the 20% of the annual attrition cost of 450K is 90K. So the savings from making that investment in training is of the order of $90,000. So what's really happened is that you have a $30,000 benefit that comes from an investment of 60K. Where did I get the 30K from? It's a difference between the 90K in annual savings relative to the cost that you have to incur to get that 90K. So you have a 30K benefit. 30K benefit relative to the initial cost of 60K puts you at a 50% ROI. Another way to look at it is to say that the benefit of 90K is realized over a year, and that 60K represents about 2/3 of that 90K, which means that if the 90K is realized over a year, the 60K is realized in 2/3 of a year or 8 months. So another way to put it is that the payback period for this investment is 8 months. So both on an ROI perspective and on a payback period perspective, you have presented a narrative that suggests that the training investment of 60K has a valuable payoff that would then make it appealing to the finance team. Now, you do have to keep a few things in mind here. Notice that you are making certain assumptions in your calculation. Right? It's quite likely that the finance team will push back on some of these assumptions. When they push back, you don't have to get defensive about the numbers, and you don't have to resist it hard. You can acknowledge the fact that these assumptions are uncertain, right? So you're making your best guesses, and you can point to published research or your own internal data to support these assumptions, right? And so by presenting a set of numbers which are tied to either the third-party information or your own experience, you now have established credibility, even if the finance team pushes back on it, but they know that you have started from a very reasonable starting point. Now, as an added step, what you can also do is offer a sensitivity range. So, for instance, in our previous example, we assumed that the 60K training investment would lead to a 20% reduction in attrition. You could do an analysis which says, what if it delivers only a 10% reduction in attrition, right? So you could do a calculation which says that even at half our estimate, the payback period is, let's say, 18 months. Yes, it is higher than the 8 months, but still it's at a point where it's a reasonable number. And so you can show that your investment thesis holds up even under a pessimistic scenario. And let's suppose that the finance team says, yeah, that's good, but we are still not comfortable. How can you reassure us that this is a good wise investment? So one of the ways to get around that, perhaps, is to suggest what's called a measurement and tracking plan. So what you might do is offer to track the metrics that are the relevant metrics on a regular basis, report back on a quarterly or on a mid-year basis. And so by doing that or running a pilot project, for example, you are conveying to the finance team that you are being very thoughtful about it. You're trying to manage the risk and you're giving them a chance to approve, um, even if it means that if there's a little more work on your part to reassure them, but it gives the finance team a chance to reassure their superiors that they're making good choices. Okay. All right. So that brings us to the last slide in this video, which is about the key takeaways from this session. Okay. So the first thing is about the format and the structure of the presentation. So it's important to have a good idea, but it's also important to present it in a way that is well aligned with the way the finance team looks at reviews the analysis or reviews your proposal. And so it's very helpful to have a one-pager which has your initial cost, which has the ROI or the payoff clearly identified, and also has the various elements such as business problem listed, full cost identified, expected returns measured, the in detail, and the and the risk of inaction highlighted, and calling out the various alternatives you have considered as well. So that was one topic. The other topic was related to the soft investments. We, as you know, and as I know, the soft investments are rarely soft. It's just that it's not easily measured. They are high value investments. So the reason why they often get rejected is not because there is no value, it's just that it is not often presented as powerfully, and nor is it presented in a manner that is quantitative, which makes it harder for the finance team to then support and approve. So the way you overcome that is through building a bridge. The bridge is really about thinking of proxies that you can use to convert a intangible outcome, a powerful outcome, but intangible in nature, and converting it into quantitative terms using a conversion metric, a proxy, a dollar proxy. So that brings us to the end of this video. As always, if some part of this is not clear or you want a more detailed explanation, feel free to reach out to me. I'll do my best to expand on these topics, but not knowing what will actually be helpful, I want to be careful about the time I invest in certain things, and I'd like to use the feedback that I get from you to focus my efforts. So I look forward to seeing you again in the next video. In the meantime, don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have any questions, and talk to you soon. Bye-bye. Fuck, I didn't record.